Hello, welcome. We've got everyone here with us today. Welcome to Festival Napa Valley's March Novack Concert for Kids with the creative team behind the first ever classical music-driven interactive video game, SOUNDSHAPES. A very hearty thank you to Kenneth and Deborah Novack for their generous support of this program and to all of the concerts for kids that we're having this spring and this summer. And to all of you for joining us today. Feel free to participate in our conversation by typing in any questions you have for our panelists in the YouTube live chat that's available there for you. We are recording this, and you are welcome to play SOUNDSHAPES, the game, free of charge at any time by visiting the web address that I'm going to share with you. It's a really, really fun thing to do at any time. I want to welcome our panelists today. I'm Lissa Gibbs, and I'm Festival Napa Valley's Director of Education. And with me today is visual artist Sophia Debus, musician Tabea Debus, composer Sidhani Banning, and designer and game programmer Alex McCartney. Give us a wave there, and tell us where each of you are right now. Who's going to go first?
Yeah.
Shall I start?
Yeah, Alex, you go first.
All right. I'm the furthest north. I'm in Glasgow in Scotland.
How cold is it there?
It's pretty chilly. I'm still wearing a woolen jumper, and I have the heating on. So
but it feels like spring? Spring's
It
still
does.
coming?
It feels like a Scottish spring, yeah.
Okay, yeah. Scottish spring. That's
still
a special spring. Right.
Yeah.
How about you, Sophia? Where are you?
I'm currently in Germany, in Münster, which is kind of north in the middle, somewhere there. And we've spring already, so it's really nice. Its temperatures are going up. That's really great, going outside, if possible.
Tabea, where are you?
I am in a small sort of market town in England called Wells. It's about 2 or 3 hours drive from London, depending how fast you drive. And I've been teaching all day here.
Sidhani?
Hi everyone. So I'm in London at the moment. It's quite boring. Everyone knows London.
No, London sounds very exciting to me right now. So it's a very, very cool thing that we have this international group with us. I wanted to ask you a little bit about how this game came into being. You were, I think, working across some time zones, and you were definitely working across disciplines. But how did this project come together? Who wants to start? Who had the idea originally, or was this something that just percolated up?
I think Alex should answer this question, really.
Alex, remind everyone what you did on this project, aside from maybe making sure that it came into being.
For this project, I was just in charge of writing the code and making sure that the audio that was recorded by John Henry Baker sounded nice in the space. That's kind of my role encapsulated, and just overseeing the aspects of game design that perhaps other people may not initially have a lot of experience of.
But you're a musician as well.
I'm a musician, yeah. I'd say principally a musician, yeah.
So how did you get involved in game design?
Well, I've always been interested in coding and programming, and this sort of comes under the auspices of creative coding, and that's and as a creative coder, sort of I'm very interested in doing lots of different types of projects. So games were definitely up there.
So how did this project come into being? Because your collaborators pointed to you saying Alex is the person to start the response to that.
Well, I think it was a while back, pre-pandemic, when Tabea and I were looking at a funding application that she was able to make for some educational projects. And I think I managed to twist her leg into producing something that was a game. But it was originally, the idea was that it was a game that you'd sort of bring physically to a space and have people interact with in real life. So the original idea, I guess, is quite far from what we've ended up with. But
yeah, we Yeah, we sort of started thinking more down the line of sort of a narrative and a story, and sort of, bringing that to people through a game rather than a film that you watch. So something sort of interactive, but still a story. And then through sort of talking to Sophia and Sidhani, the whole team, it's sort of, we sort of managed to sort of travel away from that story idea towards actually something that focused entirely around sort of audio, so sounds, contemporary music sounds, and artwork. Yeah.
So Tabea, remind everyone of your role in this project. I mean, I think what's interesting sometimes about when I'm playing the game and looking at it, I know all of you, I've gotten to know you a bit. You're all very present at every moment in that game, but you're invisible. In the sense, I mean, Sophia's artwork is there, Sidhani's composition is there, Alex's coding and game design is there. Tabea, your sounds and your music is there. So tell us about your role in the project.
Well, so this project sort of fused two interests of mine. One was for contemporary music for recorder. So Sidhani and I have actually worked together before. She's written a wonderful solo piece for a massive bass recorder and a tiny little sopranino recorder. And some of those instruments actually feature in SOUNDSHAPES as well. So that was sort of my role in sort of working with Sidhani and trying out all the sketches she sent over and demonstrating the sounds you could produce on the recorder. And then on the other side, I mean, I have quite a lot of experience organizing, projects or concerts and sort of overseeing the general sort of, day-to-day workings of making a project like this come to life. So that was my sort of other role, just, making sure everything was going, successfully.
So you're a bit of the producer as well, because it sounds like you and Alex started talking about, pursuing a funding opportunity for a different kind of project. And then what happened? And how did you bring in, what did you say to Sophia? What did you say to Sidhani? I mean, I'm assuming that you and Alex have performed together in the same physical space as musicians, but this was a different kind of project. This was more like an installation that you had in mind. So what happened next?
Well, we spoke to Sidhani and Sophia, and I think it was actually a huge sort of leap of faith from both of them to say yes to this, because I don't think Alex and I had a really clear idea of what it was going to be at all, and therefore we couldn't really tell Sophia or Sidhani exactly what they were going to do for this project. But it was rather, are you up for something new, something maybe out of your comfort zone in some way even, or something out of your knowledge or experience so far, and are you sort of interested in bringing to the table yourself as a professional, but also just a person with creative interests and sort of ideas.
I think we were quite lucky as well that they said yes. Because
yeah, that's what I was about to say.
So
did you have to convince them, or did Sidhani goes, "Oh yeah, I'm right there," and Sophia said, "What?" I mean, like, what was the response, and how did it actually come together? Because then I think at a certain point, the pandemic happened and things, what happened next? So Sophia, do you want to talk a little bit about that? Of like, well, what do you want me to do, or what is this project?
Yeah, I remember Tabea talking about, because it was actually, she was here when she first applied, I think, and she told me about the project and what it was going to be, and I said, oh, that sounds cool. And then later she actually really came to me, because we always wanted to work together, but now this is the really first time that we actually did something together. So we said like, okay, yeah, that's really cool. I'm really looking forward to it. And then yeah, it worked out. It worked out great, because theaters were closed, so I didn't have anything to do at the moment. So the pandemic came really helpful in a way that I had time, to really focus on it. So that was really,
So it's your artwork, Sophia, that's in the piece, and you normally, what is normal anyway? Yeah. But in your other work that you do scenic design, and you practice your own art practice. Yes, is that correct?
Yeah, it's correct. Yeah, I'm a stage and costume designer from what I learned, and I usually work in theater at the moment. I sometimes we do free projects as well with a lot of different arts as well. For example, with dancers and stuff like and people like that. But actually, it was the first sound-based project that I ever did. So that was really interesting.
So Sidhani, what was your reaction, and how did you get pulled in to this project?
Well, this project was really exciting to me when Tabea suggested it, because it was quite free and open, and the way that it was going to use composition interested me, because I've just come to the end of a PhD, which its title is Learning to Compose as a Tool of Ethnographic Research in a Rural Ugandan Village. So wow. It's quite a practical application of composition, and it diverts quite a lot from what you would learn to do in a conservatoire, which is often just to write concert music a lot of the time. So this project seemed really different and really exciting, and that it would, make me learn to compose in another new way.
Cool. So pandemic happens. It's not going to be a physical installation. Suddenly you have a lot of time. Everyone had a lot of time. What happened next?
We had lots of Zoom meetings.
A lot.
And okay, so how does a project like this evolve? So not only are you creating something in a technology that really hasn't been used to do a classical music-driven video game before, but you're having to work in this space. That's something very, very different. I think it's interesting to me in that, Sophia, you said that you had never done anything like this with Tabea before, and you two are sisters. You've spent your whole life and your whole upbringing probably playing together. Alex, you and Tabea have played together. Sidhani and Tabea, you've played her compositions. And so much about this game is the idea of play and interactivity. And at the heart of learning is actually play for all ages. Could you talk about that a little bit, and about how what role the idea of play and the importance of play came into this as a creative project that works across lots of disciplines in this new technology and new age?
Well, yeah. I think this idea of interactivity that we have in the game was also very much at the core of our sort of working together. And also the idea of play, because what would happen, we would come together on Zoom and sort of just talk about ideas, and someone would suggest something, and then that would prompt the other people in the group to think about that, and then we would all go offline, and think about it in our own time, and sort of play around with these ideas in our head, and sort of envisage, play the game in our minds, and to try to picture how it was going to be. And Sophia would go to her studio and sort of play around with shapes, literally. She'd get a big piece of paper, and she can tell you more about that. And I'm sure, Sidhani, you sort of went away, sort of toying with these ideas, and then we'd come back together, and then we'd sort of go off. So it was sort of this sort of together, and then away, and then together, and every time it was different when we came back.
Exactly, and especially also because when we first started to get the first shapes, get the first music, so it was a constant back and forth, and seeing, okay, this shape sounds like this, so maybe we could do a shape that is like a bit more round. I'm interested about what Sidhani comes up with, and then we started with the first level, and then we found our way to the next levels, and it was really, we were like, okay, we've got 3 levels now. We've got ideas for the 4th and 5th, and it was really once we actually found our way, we thought, this could be an endless game, and everybody could try it out as well at home. So this was also something we really enjoyed. It could be, you can find sounds anywhere, you can create these shapes and see these shapes anywhere. I remember getting a picture, I think from Sidhani, from a carrot in a funny shape. So you get reminded about shapes everywhere and sounds. So that was really interesting during the project.
I've heard you all talk about that certain shapes have certain sounds. And I had never really thought about shapes that way. I know that I've thought about how a note on a piece of sheet music, what that sounds like. And I have associations, with a half note or a full note, whether it's full in, it's sort of a negative positive thing. What kind of conversations do you have about what sounds or shapes sound like? I mean, what is that like?
I think a lot of the initial something to also say is a lot of the initial discussions that we had were rooted in this idea of accessibility for the game, and that it was primarily a sound-driven game, and therefore the shapes and the sounds had to be connected, and any event that occurred in the game had to have a sound provided for it, so that it's a a reflexive process. Every single element of the game had to have some sort of connection between a sound and a shape if they were going to interact at all. So that level of accessibility was probably what forced
when you
us
say
to think
accessibility,
in that way.
how do you mean?
Well, we initially tried to design the game so that it was accessible to those who were visually impaired as well, so that you can play the game entirely without looking at the screen. For example, it's possible to play the game. It's possible for me to play the game with my eyes closed. It's not easy, but you can do it, and you can get through all the menus. So that I think that initial idea of the accessibility in the game formed that kind of bond between the sounds and the shapes at a really early stage that forced us to think in that way.
So, Sidhani, as the composer, when someone says, "Oh, well, it's this shape," Sophia has this drawing. She's like, "I think this square, or this oblong, it sounds like this." What's as the composer, what's your response to that, and how do you then communicate that to Tabea in terms of the tonal quality that she is maybe, that's not like allegro or staccato. That's like oblong.
Yeah, no, you raise a good point. I struggled initially in this project to compose any music at all without having a sense of what the shapes might be, because if you have a completely blank canvas, it was really difficult to imagine like the world of the game. But when Sophia started producing the artworks, I don't know, I just looked at the shapes and I started to get a feel of what their characters could be. And although, as Tabea explained earlier, we moved away from having a specific narrative, it was really helpful to think about the shapes in terms of like being a friend or an enemy, because it would impact the kind of actions that were going to happen in the game. If you collide into an enemy, you would get a certain sound and it would probably be a bad thing. And if you collided into a friend, you would get another sound. So it's all those kind of connections that were really interesting. And as Alex said, imagining playing it with your eyes closed was really helpful to me to think about how you can create connections between the different shapes and the sounds, and how you can kind of link them through the music.
So that element of, auditory interaction and being able to play the game without seeing it, I think at the same time, it's actually a very satisfying experience to turn off the sound and look at it as a moving canvas. And the choice of colors are their own thing. I mean, granted, it all works together really well, and this is, it's very much about the music that is created. But perhaps, Sophia, you could say something about your artwork and your choices of color and also medium, the aquarelle that you were using, and how were you? I think you maybe even have some of those drawings that you can share with us.
Yeah, I've got them all next to me, because if you've played the game already, you can see that there are quite some shapes and some animations that happened there. So I've got like lots and lots of artwork here. So for example, as Tabea also explained earlier, I started with different materials, different kind of also pastel crayons and stuff like this. So, but I ended up with ink aquarelle colors. So basically, well, I can quickly explain you how it went. So we put the canvas on a piece of board so it stays even, because actually for Alex to use it in his game design, we needed to scan everything, so it needs to be perfectly straight. So I've got the empty canvas, then I put water on it. I will show you in a little bit. I just quickly put water inside the shape I've pre-drawn on the paper. I think you probably won't see it because of the quality of my camera on the computer, but you will see it in a little bit. So I will try to do it like this. And so I have the ink, and then it's already water in there, and then I just started putting it in. So I think you can see it a little bit already. It's just starting, and I really enjoyed trying this out and trying to see what shapes develop naturally on the paper. So that was really interesting. For example, when we started, what actually happens visually once the player collides with anything. So we thought with a friend, so this really interesting shapes inside the character with the colors, end up together. So for me, it was more of a gut decision which colors come first. And for example, we chose blue for the blue colors for the player because it's it could easily move around, get adapt colors. It's a really friendly color as well for me. So we, other than dramatic red or yellow, a bright yellow, we decided it's to give the player a sort of settling space. You can just go and are not too excited, and then you meet these exciting other friends that are, for example, I can show you one here, right, red, for example, or red, yellow and green. And we also decided to have different background colors so you can see, okay, I'm in level 1 now, so this is background color blue greenish. So you can orient yourself if you're able to play it with your eyes open and you can see it, so you're able to see where you are in the game. And that's how we started doing this.
And just bringing it back to this accessibility idea that Alex had before, so you mentioned different background colors for each of the 3 levels. Sidhani then also, we sort of played around with ideas of how maybe the background should have a sort of subtle sound. So each of those backgrounds have a sound, which is they're very similar, but then they're slightly different. So even if you don't look at the screen, you could still sort of pick up on a slight change in the sort of timbre of the sound for the background.
So we do have a question from a student who wrote in advance. How many drawings did each second of the game require? This is sort of a question about animation, and traditional animation is 24, or if it's on silent film, 18 frames per second. So each image is, each second has 24 pictures. Sophia, in working with Alex, you talked about the fact that your pictures had to be scanned. How many pictures did you have to do, and how did that work? Alex, could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, the way that video games work these days is that they use your screen refresh rate. So that can be, for like a screen like the one I'm using, it's about 60 hertz. So it's very fast. It's a lot faster than film. And what the game engine does is it calculates the time it takes between every refresh and provides an entirely new picture. So it's like a loop that's constantly going whilst you're playing the game. It's going so every time there's a new every time that the screen is going to change, it provides a new picture for the player to use, and then it calculates what, based on the movements that you've made using the player, how that's going to render on the screen. The particular animations that we use in this game when a player is moving or when there are like color changes, are quite peculiar because the images that we were using are analog images that we've then scanned in. The kinds of animations that people usually use for game design, you can't really use in the same way. So we ended up really leaning into, and Sophia, so I'm sure Sophia will speak more about this, but we ended up really leaning into this analog artwork look and aesthetic, like the texture of the paper and everything, which led to...
It has a wonderful organicness to it, which, you know,
yeah.
for all technology is still there. It's still very human, you know? But I interrupted you, Alex. Please.
No, it's fine. What was it? I was just going to say it led to actually a huge number of complications, because a lot of things that are very easy in game design is to get things to repeat or change color just using code. And obviously, if you're using lots and lots of analog images in the way that people used to make animations, which is what we've ended up doing, it becomes really difficult. So, for example, the backgrounds for each level are huge files that we had to work out how best to compress into a much smaller file that I then had to write codes to make it automatically regenerate all over the place depending on which way the player was going. So when you're playing the game and you move, you're getting the same analog picture automatically jumping to where you are moving to in the game and syncing itself with another picture. So we had to find all sorts of workarounds in order to have such lovely, vibrant and realistic textures.
So do you have anything else that you want to tell us about the coding and that process? Because on one level, I think that that's a really fascinating conversation. But on another level, it's a little overwhelming to think about maybe how much work that went into that. And I know that you had some things that you were thinking about sharing. Do you want to share?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I thought, yeah, let me share my screen. I thought it might be interesting to just show you what a game environment looks like when you're making it. So we make games
Alex,
usually
how
in
did
game
you learn how to do this?
engine.
How did you learn how to do this?
Well, basically just reading things online and following lots of courses. If you're interested in game making, there is a huge community.
What would be your advice to someone who might be interested in learning to do game design?
Initially, the things to understand are the math around graphs, so that you understand axes, because everything that you do in game design is plotted on a graph. Basically, you have your X, Y, and Z axes if you're making a 3D game, and X and Y for a 2D as we've made. So really, if you understand that math and you maybe understand a little bit of coding, it doesn't really matter what language you start learning, but if you understand how functions work and variables, then you can get started in game design pretty quickly. So the thing that I'm showing you now, this is a game, what's called a game engine, which is essentially a piece of software that has a lot of inbuilt functions for game making. Because if you make a game from scratch, writing every single bit of code, it'll take you an awful lot longer, because a lot of the physical environments that are emulated, like for example, if you move a player forwards or backwards, if you're having to write all of the code that will do that in a way that seems realistic, that's an awful lot of code to be writing. So we end up sort of sticking them together using these game engines, which you can see here is presenting me with a graph with the front page of the game. And then we attach scripts to these images. So you're constantly, it's a little bit like web design, where you're constantly writing code and seeing it rendered visually, which not all code writing obviously incorporates. Yeah, so I thought I'd just show you a little bit around here.
So your code there on screen is different colors.
It is, and that's most code most software that you write code in will do that automatically for you, so that you can differentiate between variables or functions or attributes or whatever other coding. So if you can see, where my cursor is now, that's a little function that runs before anything else runs on the page. And then above that are some variables. And a lot of the text, this is probably testament to the kind of project that we were running, where everything would develop week from week, and I'd often have to rewrite large swathes of code. Everything that is in a gray color there is just old code. It's legacy code that I've left in case we need it in future, because the way that we were developing the game was quite often we'd do something, or we'd get some new sounds, or we'd get some new shapes, and I'd put them all in, and then I'd send the game to everyone, and then we'd come back and have a discussion and decide that some things needed to change, or we needed to replace these shapes or make them interact in a different way. And sometimes we'd come back on ourselves. So it's a habit of mine, if we're making a game, in that sort of creative, collaborative way, to leave those bits of code in just in case we need them again.
So while you were coding away and you'd bring things back, Sidhani and Sophia and Tabea are doing their thing. Were they asking you things to do on the game that couldn't be done? Or were they understanding what you were doing? Were you understanding? Did Sidhani say, no, that doesn't work? And Sophia's like, I'm not going to give you any more drawings. And Tabea's like, we're not recording that again. I mean, what were the challenges? What were the challenges? And how did you make decisions about what was a priority to do next? How did that work? You know, I mean, like, we know in an orchestra that you have a conductor and everyone's got, you know, their composed part, and now it's this time to focus on this, and the violins have to be strong here, or, you know, this is where the piccolo comes in. This is a different kind of collaboration. What would happen when you would bring things back, Alex and Sidhani? How did you guys make decisions about what was important to do next?
Well, I will say that, like, quite early on, Alex was sort of explaining the coding process and all the sorts of things that you could do with the sounds, and I was quite overwhelmed because it was kind of parameters that I hadn't even vaguely considered. You know, I thought I'd be composing little sound bites that would be recorded by Tabea on the recorder, and then they'd be put in the game. But there were all sorts of things that you can then do to manipulate that sound once it's been recorded that mean that the creative process was just like constantly evolving. Alex can explain more about what those sorts of things are, but initially I found it so overwhelming because it was things that I hadn't even thought about or didn't realize could be done.
I remember that first discussion quite well, where I'd say, think of something that could happen, and I can probably make it happen. And we were sort of coming up with suggestions, and I was saying things like, oh, well, I could make it so that if this set of conditions were met, then you know, the sound could drop 2 octaves, but only if the player was going left, or something like that. You know, we can make all of these interesting conditions for everything.
Scenarios of play. Mm-hmm. So I have a couple questions. We have a question from a student at Napa Valley College here in Napa, and it's probably a question for you, Alex. When you were coding this game, did you think of yourself first as a coder and then as a musician, or vice versa? I mean, what was the relationship between, you know, things that you knew how to do and bring to a creative team?
I think musician, but also I felt a certain responsibility for explaining what was going on and what was possible and how things might work in the game, just because of prior experience with that. So I think certainly I have a real care for sound and for recorded sound as well, and how that is created in a virtual environment. Like, I was really into that. What
instruments do you play?
So I'm a plucked person. I play the lute. I came from the guitar, but the whole lute family and historical guitars.
Sophia, do you play an instrument?
Well, I used to play harp, but due to a lot of work at the theatre, I don't play as much as I wanted to. So it was really nice to come back to music with this project.
And Sidhani?
I play clarinet. That's my main instrument.
So when you're composing, are you trying things out on your clarinet, or?
Probably more on the piano, I'd say, just because it's easy to try things out and sort of improvise and fiddle around. If I was writing specifically for the clarinet, I would test it out on the instrument. But no, this was really interesting because Tabea is just such a phenomenal recorder player. So
yes,
for a project,
we definitely need to. And Tabea, you have some of your recorders, I think, in the back there. Can we see them? Can you share them?
Sure. Well, let me just give you a quick, I didn't bring all my instruments because if you decide to become a recorder player, like turning a hobby into a profession, you will end up like playing a whole array of recorders and sort of it's a lifetime of collecting instruments.
How many do you have now? You have a lot, and you have some unusual recorders too.
Yeah, I've got about 30, but then I have to say I have quite a lot of instruments that are actually essentially the same, just sound slightly different because they're from a different maker. So the majority of my instruments are handmade. So I have this, it's black, so it's not really that visible on screen, but so that's a Descan recorder that I'm sure a lot of especially the children listening or the adults listening, have played in school. I don't know what it's like in the US, but certainly in Europe, in Germany, lots of children are playing this instrument in school. And then so Sidhani also asked me to play quite a lot of the fragment, especially sort of the, actually both for friendly and for sort of enemy sounds on the sopranino.
Can you give us a sample of a friendly sound?
Yeah, sure. So we've got sopranino and soprano. Oops, this way. So tiny little recorder. The sopranino, for example, gets used when you connect the player to a friend, so a sort of latching sound. Sort of has almost like a bird-like quality, but then of course, being such a high instrument, it can sound quite sort of piercing, almost painful. So it also got featured in some of the sort of more enemy sounds, the sounds that you should avoid.
Isn't that funny? You can have both.
Sorry?
Isn't that funny that you can have both out of the same
in one instrument? And also, the same goes for the larger instruments that I have. So there are quite a few sounds that I play on a tenor recorder. My screen was large enough, so you can see it's quite significantly, actually twice as long as the Descan recorder. It's got some keys here at the bottom, so I can actually play the lowest note because my fingers wouldn't be long enough to cover all the holes without help. And this gets used for a lot of the friendly sounds just because it's such a lovely, mellow, sort of gentle sound. So you hear that a lot. That was sort of friend number one, which features on all levels. But also by sort of changing your articulation, so the way you sort of speak with or through the recorder, you can also get more sort of percussive sound, which you also have in a lot of features in a lot of the sounds.
I was wondering how that particular sound was made because it has that percussive. I thought, oh, who's doing the percussion? I didn't realize that it was one.
Yeah, there's actually two types of percussion. So there's this articulation, which we call sputato. I was like, when I explain it to my students, I would say it's like almost like spitting, but without, moisture, ideally. So like that, so really sort of sound. But then there's also quite a lot of finger percussion. So you've got these open finger holds. So if you sort of press your fingers down quite hard, you get at least a very soft sort of tapping. Don't know if you can hear that so well, but so we put a microphone really close to the recorder, to the instrument, that it picks up those sounds. So they also really.
So recording these sounds, Alex, you mentioned the sound recordist. Who was the sound recordist, and how many other people were involved in creating this game? I mean, you're the core creative team, but I imagine that there were other people who were also involved. And can we talk about them a little bit?
Actually, not that many.
Really?
We could name all the people who tested it, and that's quite.
Give us some shout outs. Let's hear it.
Well, John Henry Baker did the recording sessions with Sidhani and Tabea there.
And those were done in London?
Yes.
Yeah.
Actually quite difficult because I mean, it's very hard to find recording spaces in London that are quiet enough for a single recorder, especially if you're making sounds like these finger taps, or we have sort of breath sounds where you just sort of blow into, you know, one of those finger holes or something. So I remember sort of standing there and sort of waiting until this 1 second of silence, and then really quickly getting the sound.
Silence is another element of the composition and of the process. Yeah. So we have a question here from a student at Justin Siena High School in Napa. And this is for Sophia, you and Tabea. What were the good and bad parts of working with your sister on this project? I think that, you know, often our first collaborators and playmates are siblings, our cousins. They're people in our family, and definitely collaborating with a family member has some really great parts. I'm a sister. I'm the little sister. Yeah, Sophia, are you the little sister?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I know that there's some really wonderful things. I also know that there's some challenging, and so the student would love it if you, who I actually know has a sister as well. So that was one of the things that she noticed about the team. So if you could talk a little bit about that, and then Sidhani and Alex could maybe even have a perspective on it.
Tabea, do you want to start?
No, I'll let you have the
Okay, no, I can also start. No, it was great. Of course, when you're sisters, you tell each other directly what you mean or what you like or what you don't like. So that's really good. And sometimes, yeah, that happens. But I would say for this project, I was really happy because Tabea helped me a lot, actually, especially because she was coordinating everything. And for me, because it was one of the first times I did an all English project. So for me, the language wise, it was really, really great that she was there. So I could always, when we were Zooming and I didn't understand a word, especially when it comes to music, I do play an instrument, but I'm not that good with the terminology. So I could always say, Tabea, what's this again? So was really helpful. And also right at the beginning, I'm really thankful that we were in there together. So when we did the Zoom and got all this input from each other, we could go together to the shed. So I did my drawings and Tabea came out and we talked about it. So that was really great, actually. It went way better than I thought it would. It's quite positive. Yeah, and I would say, because sometimes you can, it can also happen that you think, okay, probably not another time, but I would say, I don't know how about you, Tabea, but I would work with you again. So.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I would work with you again too. I think it's interesting, if you grow up with a sister, you definitely go through different stages. I mean, when you're little, I mean, you play together and, you know, there might be a certain dynamic because one of you is a little bit older and one of you is a bit younger. And Sophia and I are very different characters, you know, almost opposing characters, I would say, in many ways. But then when you sort of, you get older and you go away and study and you move away from home, you know, you become your own person much more, you sort of develop individually. And then often what happens when you come back and then work together again, maybe actually stay at home again for a while, which happened during lockdown, you then sort of see your sister in a slightly different light because she's been away, she studied, she's done all this amazing work like Sophia has at a theatre, which, you know, I went to see some of her plays and it's just stunning, you know, to see, you know, her sort of professional work. And then you sort of respect, you know, you don't see your sister only as your sister, and as maybe your little sister, who you know, you've had to, you know, I don't know, tell how to play this certain games when you were little because she couldn't do it right. You know, what happens with siblings. But you see her as a sort of colleague or a friend, or yeah.
So I think, you know, one of the things that did happen in the lockdowns that we've had during the pandemic is that we did have to work with the people that were with us, and we found these things and collaborated over Zooms, and people have been very creative in figuring out new ways to work. But, you know, the families that had 4 musicians got to be quartets. They got to continue playing, and soloists got to collaborate by force in new and different ways. So it's very interesting that the two of you found a unique way to collaborate. And Sidhani and Alex, I don't know whether you want to comment on what that was like at all, but it really, for me, do you want to make any kind of comment? Because I do have a question that's kind of related to. I
think it's worth just saying that both of their individual characteristics and energies were both like really, really welcome in the project, and they complemented each other really well.
Yeah, I'd say that's true. So how do you think that the pandemic has changed the way that musicians and artists will collaborate in the future moving forward? We're now in this transition period, but which is its own kind of interesting thing, but how do you think some of the best parts of what we've learned by these forced ways of new collaboration methods and forms, what are some of the things that we're going to see moving in the future? What are you all thinking about? What's your next project? Would you do a project like this again and do it in this way? So it's a little bit of, what do you think the future is going to look like in terms of collaborations and musicians? I mean, we were beginning to see some of it in, you see all the ensemble pieces, but, one piece of music played by 5 different people in different locations and cut back, it's an editing thing. What are your thoughts about, technological facilitated collaborations between musicians and artists and visual artists in the future? Don't all jump at it.
I think, I think for this project has certainly, for me, made me feel like it's possible to make, to slightly maybe stretch and widen some of the boundaries that classical music wasn't necessarily jumping to. And particularly the type of maybe, rooted in a historical performance or historically informed performance. That scene can tend to be very busy. There's lots of interest for performances and stuff, and having the time and the space away from the sort of expectations of that scene, I think really helped with for me personally, with how much time and effort we could put into this project to make it something successful.
Tabea. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, for me, I've not actually met Sophia in person or Alex in person, yet it has still felt really human, this whole process. So I think, I'd like to have a tone of optimism for the future that, we can still carry on pursuing these things, even if we can't meet in person. But it would be good to meet in person one day.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. That didn't even occur to me that you all didn't know each other in person.
No. Actually, Tabea is the only one that knows each of us in person. So it's really, really cool. Also, I think you asked earlier how we cope with deadlines and stuff like this, how we did it. So it was really good to have her as a connecting point to all of us. I really, really enjoyed that we had this person, because we weren't able to meet each other in person. So at least we had one who knew all of us. So that was great.
Yeah, Tabea, can you talk about that a little bit? I mean, as the producer and also as someone who tours, you work with lots of different people and in different places, and just if you could talk a little bit about.
Sure. So I mean, I think so I'm a lot of my time usually I spend sort of performing or traveling and playing, either with people that I know well and that I know already that I enjoy playing with, or with totally new people, and I think what I'm always sort of thinking about a lot in my playing is, obviously often I get invited to come and perform a solo concert somewhere with a group of people that I don't know, or with one collaborator, and then of course I'm sort of expected to be the soloist, but I'm always sort of very sort of slightly wary of that idea, actually, because I think even if you're technically there as a soloist, how you play, I mean, you wouldn't play like you play if you didn't have these other people in the room with you, and they have a sort of equally important, if you want to use that word, sort of role to play. And therefore sort of I've been sort of thinking about that a lot, and to sort of trying to sort of make it sort of as inclusive and collaborative an experience as possible, no matter where I'm playing or who I'm playing with. And sometimes that works, and I do it more successfully than other times, I'm sure. And sometimes it's just needed to be, you just need someone to stand there and say, right, this is what we're going to do, and sort of be the sort of boss in a way. So this project in particular was really a real good learning sort of journey for me, because sort of I started off really not wanting to be the sort of the person running the project in a way, and then it took me a little while to sort of find my feet and be like, okay, right, I'm not running this project, but I'm sort of overseeing it, and
you're the middle of the wheel.
Yes, enabling everyone else to do their best, or just sort of trying to sense points where it's necessary for someone to just say, like, right, listen, we've got so many ideas, let's focus on these, and then of course, but then making it clear to everyone else that at any point of time, they can always be like, no, I don't agree, and I will listen. And, I'm always sort of, open to other people's thoughts and opinions, and,
Other than just simply saying that, which is important, were there other things that you did to make sure that everyone felt that they could at any point say, I don't agree with this, or I have another idea, or I think we should do that? How do you foster an environment that allows people to feel like they can contribute that way? I mean, you as an educator as well, and as a musician performing.
I think two things. One, listening, but not just listening to the words, but actually hearing them. I mean, do you know what I mean? So, I will listen to what Sophia says, but then I will also register it, So processing it is the one key thing, listening and then asking questions. That's basically how I teach. I try to not, ask a student to play in a certain way, but I ask like, oh, how about this? Or, I make a suggestion, or I ask a question, what do you want to say with this note? Or why are you playing this phrase in that way, or something? So just sort of asking questions, listening, and maybe sometimes drawing someone's attention to how I perceive what they've just said or done or drawn.
It's really interesting that the word play is what we use to make music, and you play with other people, and you play your instrument. It's the same in sports, that you play a sport. And what happens when you're playing sport is always completely based on what happens with the other person and how you react to it, which is also the same thing that happens in the game, SOUNDSHAPES. In terms of it's this constant play, that the form and content of the game is very similar to its creation. It's very holistic that way, and I really enjoyed that aspect of it. And it's all around this idea of play. And I don't know whether I think that's the same way in many languages, but in English, the word play really is very encompassing, and that a big part of play is listen, and observing. And being engaged that way. Sidhani, anything that you'd like to add to that about?
I was just going to say that I think we didn't have any personality clashes in this kind of group of collaborators. We all just blended together really well, actually. You described it best, Alex, when you said it was wholesome.
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah, and it was certainly an environment where it was very easy to make suggestions, because there was never any shutting down of ideas or blame for certain things. It was very, as I was saying, the sort of weekly or fortnightly experience of just trying stuff out, showing it to everyone, and everyone coming back with ideas worked really well. And we didn't, and actually, again, the nature of the relationship between Tabea and Sophia was great as well, because Tabea was very good at having this sort of oversight and taking people's ideas, but not necessarily saying that we'd follow through all of them. And Sophia was great at coming up with 1,000 ideas in every meeting. in a really enthusiastic way. You know, like it felt like there was a good amount of enthusiasm and respect for everyone's ideas when they brought them.
So what are you all working on now? Are you working on anything together, or are you working on your own projects? You know, we're coming out of this period where we've been in boxes, and hopefully being able to be more engaged in the world and outside of our pods and our family units. The world is going to get physically bigger. I mean, it got bigger because of the internet, you know, but at the same time, our worlds got smaller. But what are you working on now? Anyone want to go?
Sophia,
Yeah,
theatres are back open, aren't they?
Huh? Sorry.
Theatres are back open, aren't they?
Not yet. They're always postponed. So we wanted to go open again in April, after Easter, but I think they postponed it for another 2 weeks. But we are still preparing. We are allowed to work without with certain precautions. We can actually prepare pieces. So we are working on an opera, and we are preparing 2 children's plays, one for children from 12 years on, and one for the really small 1-year-old people. So that's really exciting. I really hope that we will be able to perform them in person for all of you. In Germany, probably it's easier to access them, but yeah, that's what we are working on at the moment.
Alex?
I'm doing a mixture of a few different things. I run a record label in my spare time, and I'm preparing a few CDs for other people on that. And I'm also doing some website development and preparing a couple of lute recitals.
Tabea?
I think my work and my career is changing a lot at the moment, which is great. It's always good to have change every now and then sort of run with that and do other things. So I'm doing a lot of teaching, and I have to say I think my teaching style has really evolved through this whole sort of lockdown period and having to do it all online, and hopefully for the better. So I'm doing lots of sort of workshops and collaborations also with one, for example, with a mandolin player friend of mine and a dancer, sort of on Renaissance music and dance, and yeah, some more recitals. April is actually looking quite busy with various, online, virtual, live stream, pre-recorded, and so on concerts, but still with other people. So yes, I'm greatly looking forward to that, and mainly sort of I'm thinking a lot about sort of programming and what I program and how I program it, and how everyone who's involved in the music making or the creative process of that can sort of have their say and their sort of put their touch on what's been.
Sidhani, how about you?
Well, I was hesitant to go first just because mine's quite boring. I've got my PhD viva in
I was going to say your PhD
May.
is,
Yeah, so I've got to do the defense in May. So I'm basically just preparing for that and making sure that 5 years of work I've fully assimilated and can present and defend properly.
So we have one last question from a student in Sonoma. Would you do a project like this together again?
Yes.
Yeah. So overall, it was a good one. And then one last thing, we always end, what's your advice to young people who perhaps want to pursue a career as a composer or as a game designer?
Well, for composition, if it's helpful, I would say that you can start to learn to compose at any time. I didn't formally begin to do it until I did an undergraduate degree in music. So I was 18, 19 years old before I properly started to compose. And then I went and did a master's in it. And that's where I met Tabea. So you're not kind of born as a composer. You can learn to do it at any point in your life. So just take whatever opportunities become available to you. And if you enjoy it, then pursue it.
Alex?
I'd just say if you're curious and you like playing with things, then any type of coding is great for that.
And you mentioned that there's a lot of things you can do to teach yourself. Yes.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I'm self-taught. Yes, there's so many resources and very friendly people online. In fact, there's the Free Code Camp, I think, which is in America, which is an institution, charity, I think, run, and they provide loads and loads of courses for free about all sorts of coding, things like that. There are lots of really good institutions like that.
Cool. Well, next month, our Novack Concerts for Kids program is actually an online workshop with a composer on music composition, Neomani Franklin. She is many things, a very, very talented performer, formally trained vocalist, and composer, and the 2019 Miss America title holder. So she's had a very interesting life path, and she is doing a week-long after-school online workshop called Compose Her, that focuses on music theory and composition. The culminating session is a performance she will do the performance of students' work. It's a smaller class, so it's by teacher or school recommendation, program recommendation only. So if anyone wants to participate in that, they need to email us. And we'd love to hear from you around it. Thank you, all of you, so much for joining us today. Thank you for your creativity. Thank you for your patience in the world and with each other, and for creating this really, really fun game. If anyone out there watching is interested in communicating with us, you can find us. Email us at boxoffice@festivalnapavalley.org. To play SOUNDSHAPES, you can go to the website. It's a great website, very simple. Anyone at any age can play this game, and you've done a really, really wonderful thing. Tabea, we look forward to having you here in Napa in the future. We wish all of you good health. Any last words that you want to share? Any last comments?
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you to the Novacks for their support of the Novack Concerts for Kids series at Festival Napa Valley. Really enjoyed speaking with you all today, and wish you a happy spring, and good luck in all of your pursuits.
You too.
Thank you.
Bye. Stay safe.
Bye.
Bye.